Selamat kembali ke Safe Space. Our previous questions for this episode can be found here. Enjoy!
So I'd like to discuss with you about that Christian theology over the ages has been shaped by Western philosophers, such as Plato and Aristotle. I think it was Augustine who took after Plato and Aquinas who took after Aristotle.
Probably, yeah.
How can you share about that story?
Yeah. All right. Definitely, modern Christian theology is, in some sense, beholden to the Greek philosophy. Our very idea of a perfect God comes from that. Now here, of course, we're going to get into a little bit of controversy, because guys like me, for example, I don't know if I can say it. I actually don't believe in the Greek perspective of perfection and changelessness. So that's one axiom. The fact that the Greeks connected perfection with changelessness.
Yeah.
Right, and that, in my view, creates a lot of problems. The reason being, it causes Christians to have conception of God, a preconception of God, prior to going to the Bible. So they would read the Bible's view of God, of Jesus and so on and so forth, of God's passions and God's plans, and control it using a Greek frame of mind, which is, so for example, anytime you read a passage about God changing his mind, immediately the knee-jerk reaction, no, God is a perfect being, he cannot change his mind, so therefore you would just change the Bible meaning from its original verse. So that's
so you're saying that the Greek idea of perfection is of God is one who is perfect, that who does not change.
Yeah.
And
correct.
What would be maybe the Jewish way of that's different from?
Sure. Well, okay. I'm probably, if I could say what I would claim is the biblical way, is that if you read the minor prophets, major prophets, I mean, basically you follow the whole narrative of Old Testament, you see that God is a person in time. God is a person who emotes. God, I mean, to be very blunt, God changes his mind. God asks what if. God might. So what I'm trying to say is, I think we need to recover that aspect of God being a person, with all the, with all the experiences of a person, the before and after. And for example, instead of saying that God is timeless, what the Bible says God is eternal, and what theologian Clark Pinnock said is that God is a being who perfectly experiences time. So, and I love this rethinking, this whole exercise in reimagination, because it forces me to really come to grips with the picture that the Bible presents. If I know, and I think more Christians should know, if I know that many Christians and many theologians' view of God has been shaped and locked in by Greek philosophy, and to use a very crude word, by pagan philosophy, then I know that, hey, I can read the Bible in a fresh light to put off all these shackles of pagan philosophy. Right.
Yeah, I think what you said is, I just read, I love Walter Brueggemann, and he talks about how the whole idea, and again this is potentially controversial, the whole idea of God being the three omnis.
Right.
He is always all-knowing, all-powerful, all-present.
Right.
But he kind of says, but look, the Old Testament expresses God in such a way where he uses the term dialogical, whereby it's kind of like he is always in relation to someone, and it's always a relationship, and that kind of ties into what you mentioned about changing, changing his mind, changing his and there's a very internal complexity in God,
that's right.
whereby he struggles through things, he feels strongly,
he feels pain.
He reflects, he thinks before he makes a decision.
That's right. And he plans,
Yeah.
Now, actually, on that score, you see, if you really are consistent with the Greek philosophy, you come to this thing called the impassibility of God. In other words, a God who cannot suffer. And I still confess that I'm quite shocked that there are actually many theologians who actually believe that. So on one hand, you actually believe that Jesus is God, Jesus died and suffered on the cross, but at the back of your mind, you believe in this thing called the impassibility of God, the impassible God, the God who does not suffer. Because strictly speaking, again, if God is a perfect being, he never changes, then how can you say that he suffers? It doesn't make sense as I see it, and yeah, so, and I think that if Christians continue to let's just believe it anyway, that kind of makes us less persuasive in the public square, because people will kind of ask, hey, but isn't that a contradiction? And then, oh yeah. So I think Christians have to rethink that notion.
Why do you think it's important? Like the question I'm asking now is, what is the difference between someone who believes in the Greek way, so to speak, and someone who believes in the other way that you mentioned?
Right. Well, the first criterion is, of course, the criterion of truth, right? Jesus says, I'm the way, truth, and the life. So at the end of the day, you don't have to be ashamed or afraid if you're approaching the issue of truth. So to me, the first thing is, if the Greek way is, can I say, false or less true, then, and the biblical one is true, then you should have no shame moving to the biblical one. And truth is not neutral, abstract truth with no impact. I mean, as we all know, you cannot consistently believe in something that's not true and so-called get away with it. The truth is always tied to character, right? So the first answer would be, I would choose to challenge traditional theology if I think that is wedded to a pagan philosophy, and the reason I would do that is because I believe that is not the truth, and you should be proud of presenting the truth as we know it.
Okay, so what we discussed here is pretty big.
Oh yeah, it's very.
So how would we now read people like Augustine and read people, those fathers of the faith, so-called, of the early church, who have interpreted the biblical text in that way now?
Yeah, all right, now we're going to get a bit of history here. I'm not fully sure, but I believe that prior to Augustine, this whole Greek stuff wasn't as entrenched. In other words, I don't think that the early church fathers prior to Augustine believed in this Greek stuff that we talked about. I believe they, again, if you could ask them or meet them, they probably didn't have that kind of view. But Augustine was the first guy who really made it popular, and just like Constantine was the first person that brought Christ into the government. So Augustine was, you could say, the first person that brought Greek categories really smack into the nature of God and all that kind of stuff. Well, having said that, I think that love is patient, love is kind, and so we need to be kind to our forefathers, and we we recognize that everyone is limited in his own time, and so we don't judge them, yeah.
Certainly, again, if we were to step out of that and to look at it from afar,
right.
Certainly there are ways whereby we read the Bible with our own biases. I mean it in the sense that we have our own questions,
sure.
And then the question of God being those things, unchanging and things like that.
Right.
And I suppose these were the biases that they read. So they read God into their own biases and their own questions.
Okay. Right. Probably.
What is the validity of us doing that if we are to say that, look, we want to read the Bible to answer some question, let's say from an Asian point of view or Eastern point of view.
Okay.
Could we read the Bible, let's say, whether on purpose or accidentally, from a Confucian point of view?
Oh, wow. Okay, I think the straightforward answer is yes. I think there's one book called Models of Contextual Theology by Stephen Bevan or something like that. Now, the position I would start out with is the fact that all of us are located somewhere, and we wake up in in what you call a paradigm community. So we have no choice but to read the Bible and come to God with the question that we have. And I think God, being God, affirms that we have these questions and stuff like that. Now, if you remember, I think what you said about Walter Brueggemann about how God's nature is dialogical. Now, there's another word for it, it's called dialectical, which you could say that absolute truth is dialectical. So, whether it's 1500 or 2017, the absolute truth of God is in continual relationship and dialogue with the people, whether it's 1500 Europe or 2017 Malaysia. So, God meets us where we are. Now, that doesn't mean that it's good, it's okay to embrace falsehood or whatever it is. It just means that we have certain modes of thinking. Now, from here we can go on to the Asian theology. Asian theologies have a different priority. If I could just put it that way. They, in a way, Asians seem to be more accepting of, say, Asian theology is less dichotomous, more open, more relational. Now, this is not like, and I think what this shows is the emphasis. All right, so Asian theology has an emphasis, has a certain style. Western theology has a certain emphasis, certain style. And of course, the questions are, of course, like for example, right now, how do you bring how do you analyze the Rohingya situation in the Bible and stuff like that? So some is a circumstance as well. All right. So just to tie it back together, I think God meets us where we are, and Asian theology is part of where we are. All right. And I believe God affirms that. Having said that, it doesn't mean that therefore anything goes. That's why you have a dialogue, right? That's why you dialogue. If it's just one way, then you have this very parochial kind of doctrine. If it's like God to you, but if it's you to God, then that's very humanistic. I think it's that dialogical thing, all right? So even if I have an Asian theology with me, if I have Asian way of thinking, I can still be corrected by the Bible, and I can still read the Bible in a different way from how Western people read it, right? So that's how I view it.
God questions? Connect with us. Send us a tweet or an email.